Welcome to the KayaCast, the podcast for cannabis businesses looking to launch, grow, and scale their operations.
You have a unique position in the hemp industry in that you had front row seats in somewhat of the legislative process. Can you detail maybe just a little bit to those that are listening who you are and your involvement in pushing the hemp industry forward?
Yeah. Well, my name is Andrew Bish, and I serve as president of the Hemp Feed Coalition. And one of the things that I'm currently doing relative to moving this industry forward legislatively, and I do all of this work. Our Hemp Feed Coalition is a nonprofit that's focused on education, so this is kind of a side gig to the side gig, and we're ultimately trying to ensure that we have proper regulation in the market for hemp. For people that were in the United States, a lot of people are aware that our appropriations bill that passed in November of this last year ultimately put a very, very heavy restriction on the hemp industry with a 0.4 milligram cap for an unknown quantity of hemp. And this is for THC, right? Not 0.4 milligrams. So I looked at this with my Hemp Feed Coalition cap on and said, this is a real problem. Our mission at the Hemp Feed Coalition isn't cannabinoids, but we have residual cannabinoids in the grain. There's cannabinoids that come off of the seed head, that are coming in contact with the flower, and ultimately that leads to some cannabinoids. So if we say, for instance, we have a 0.4 milligram limit on a per container basis, and my container is the size of a semi-truck, we might have an illegal product. And so to me, I immediately started taking action to figure out what are some avenues that we can go down, who can we do to try to help this situation. Cannabinoids specifically aren't our focus, and we need to try to help that side of the industry get its footing.
Wow, so you're coming at this on a different part of the industry. I know that there's a lot of people that are on the other side of the industry where cannabinoids is part of the product. This is a byproduct that's not really part of the feed, and you don't want this part of the product, but it just happens that it's there naturally. When you guys are talking to the White House and the people in power, are you joining forces with other parts of the industry collectively?
I would say that there's been some challenges. I'm constantly reaching out to some of these other working groups, associations that are out there, trying to join forces with them. I think that the challenge for me has been, at least in terms of how we work together, that we're trying to accomplish two different things.
Yeah, no, it's true. One is, it's clear as day. So maybe if you don't mind sharing, what has been the conversations like in Washington?
Yeah, well, the conversations are interesting. I think one of the big problems that we have that this industry, the cannabinoid industry, is going to have to grapple with is that Congress does not have an appetite for intoxicating cannabinoids. And it seems like most of the dollars going into lobbying, into the efforts in Congress, are focused on how do they carve out space for intoxicating cannabinoids. And I think they're actually shooting themselves in the foot in that regard, because when I walk into the room and we start talking about industrial hemp and how we need to regulate cannabinoids for the sake of ensuring that there is a reasonable amount of CBD, THC, THCA, CBDA, CBG, all the different cannabinoids, whatever they might be, you can tell from the posture of the people that we're talking to, and directly they'll tell me that they're interested in trying to find ways to do that don't allow for large milligrams of intoxicants to exist.
Got it. So the motivation for the government really is, we don't want to freeze the industry, so to say, particularly not your part of the industry. But what does that look like when maybe the sense is people were being too liberal with how the rules were written. So
Yeah, well, yeah, they definitely found a wedge in the door and pulled that door all the way open relative to cannabinoids. And again, when we talk about cannabinoids, I think it's a problem in general. When we're dealing with Congress, for instance, these guys aren't experts. These ladies, Congress people, whoever we're talking to, they're just not experts on plants. So when they think, well, we want the industrial side to prosper, but we don't want THC, it's hard for them to fathom that, well, THC just exists.
yeah,
And
naturally.
that's just a part of the plant. So we're going to have to figure out how we're going to wrangle this.
So that's interesting. So are talks, lack of a better word, are they progressing? Are they favorable? Where does the government stand today?
Well, when you spell it out, when you get enough time to actually talk through what banning different cannabinoids means to the entire industry, they start to become more favorable to the conversation of, okay, how do we set up reasonable regulation for this? But until they understand that point, oftentimes, what at least my experience is, there's an arm's length in terms of how they're pushing back against some level of intoxicant and trying to legalize that particular or prevent the legalization of that intoxicant. And honestly, I think that's fine, because when I say we, there were a lot of people that helped legalize hemp that started out a lot earlier than I did in the United States. But the objective of hemp wasn't to figure out how do we legalize marijuana on the back of the hemp. That wasn't the message that we sold. So I think that what has happened in the hemp industry has sullied the message a little bit. And for some of us that are really involved with grain and fiber, we're trying to go back and figure out, okay, how do we pick up these pieces? How do we rebuild these relationships and rebuild this trust, knowing that there is an aspect of this industry that is causing politicians a lot of consternation.
You know what's interesting to me is that's so true, because I have the lens of looking at the Farm Bill from a psychoactive perspective, but it got passed from as an agricultural plant. Like, I'm from Canada, and we're able to grow hemp, and I think for the longest time in the US before the Farm Bill, you're not able to grow hemp, but you can import it in, which doesn't make any sense at all. There's this weird world that the US is operating in where it's not illegal to have, but it's illegal to grow. And the Farm Bill straightened that out. It just made things less wonky and more straightforward, but that opened the door to another industry that the Farm Bill wasn't designed for.
Yeah, well, ultimately, the Farm Bill didn't contemplate what to do with hemp past the farm gate. And that's where we were really left with a major problem. And then the USDA actually tried to correct this issue, thinking that they could resolve it with in-field testing, which was just it just wasn't a workable idea. But that's what they tried to do with the final rule, is establish in-field testing that accounted for 0.3% THC. And that really wasn't what the problem was, because post the farm gate is where all of this processing is being done and all of this concentration is being done. So it doesn't really matter what you measure it on the farm.
It's true, because the plant itself is naturally low in THC.
Correct. And the USDA doesn't have any purview after it leaves the farm. So this industry was able to proliferate mostly because of a dereliction in duty from the FDA that had the ability to step in and regulate this, but routine has kicked back and said that Congress needs to be more specific in its direction to the FDA.
So Andrew, what direction is Congress heading towards? I know there's still time before things kick in, but we're at a race to that day.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So where's Congress heading? A couple different directions. You know, our conversations with the Senate and House Ag Committee have been somewhat fruitful. In the current Farm Bill markup, we do see a bifurcation of hemp, so a different regulation for floral versus grain and fiber on an in-field testing standpoint, which again, solves almost nothing. There's advantage to that from a farming perspective, and I think that there's a lot of advantage from a banking and insurance perspective for farmers that are doing grain, because now we can talk about, instead of saying hemp, we can talk about industrial hemp, or we can talk about floral hemp. So that's one aspect of what the government is doing, and we would anticipate that that will pass if the Farm Bill ever comes to fruition. Now, and that's kind of elusive. There's a markup next week, and I've got some meetings tomorrow with some congressional offices to make sure that we've got everything in there we need to from a USDA direction. But the Farm Bill itself isn't a vehicle to regulate hemp. So what we're seeing is Congressperson Griffith, their office has put forward a bill that's ultimately a regulatory pathway for hemp. I don't think it's got the legs that it needs to have. I think it's got some definite challenges in terms of gaining the support that it needs to gain. Outside of that, there's not really a lot of energy being put from Congress people to make any changes. I think there are a lot of people, both on the House side and the Senate side, fully prepared and willing to allow for McConnell's 0.4 milligram cap to take effect.
Oh, that's unfortunate to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I still think it's fixable, because that's why we're up there. I don't think I think we need some support, honestly, of the rest of the cannabinoid space, because what the members that aren't working with, and they're not necessarily working against us, but the ones that aren't working with us, which is most of them, are highly focused on an extension of the appropriations language, but they don't have any substance behind the extension, and there's got to be some substance behind having
What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate?
I think there's an appetite for certain Congress people to be willing to support an extension of this McConnell appropriations language if that were coupled with an appropriate regulatory pathway. So if they were to get both of those, it would make sense. But the extension itself is really going to not have, it's just not going to have any legs. That seems to have been an effort that people have been trying to get going for several weeks now, and I can't find anywhere there's an appetite to accept that.
Wow. You're on the ground right now. What do you think is going to happen when we approach that date?
I think that there's another action that's going to happen before that day. If you look at, and I think it's going to have to come out of the White House, Donald Trump already signed an executive order. He'd like to see CBD given to people on Medicaid, Medicare. He wants that to be available to people. And he wants that available to people in April. There's actually a gap in the current regulatory pathway, because there's not a regulatory pathway that is going to stifle that effort. So if the White House actually wants to make this happen, they're going to have to give some direction to the FDA to start regulating this. The FDA was supposed to turn in a cannabinoid list already, and they failed to do that timely, which is not unexpected. But ultimately, that's what I would think is going to happen, since I don't see where, again, there's energy on Capitol Hill to do anything. The White House is going to have to take some actions to be able to put their original executive order into place.
Yeah, that's movement for sure.
Yeah, that's what gives me hope that there's going to be a little bit more brisk action, is because there's a lot of energy in the White House trying to get CBD to certain people, and they're going to immediately stumble.
So actually, Andrew, what else would you like to share to our listeners around this process?
I'd say, I oftentimes talk to people and I say, talk to your congressman, make sure that you support this or whatever that is. But I think there's a lot of nuance right now out there, and calling your congressman and saying you support the hemp industry is actually not the most useful tactic that there is, because it's hard to sort out what that means. I think one thing that'd be useful for people to know relative to where we are is that this industry does have to find a way to come together and want to be regulated. And it needs to start paying attention to people that are trying not to move that direction, because those are the individuals that are directly in the way of the rest of the industry proliferating. There's opportunity out there, but we've got to see this. We've got to see the good players, the good actors come forward and say, look, we're not going to listen to parties that actually aren't interested in trying to figure out how we get regulated. I think that's an unworkable strategy. I wish would change. But I do understand that most of the money coming into the space right now is coming from a space that doesn't want regulation. So there is that conundrum of how do you continue to drive this bus forward while removing one of the chief gasoline supplies that you have.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head in that I talk to a lot of people in the industry, and they're not running away from regulation, but it's more what does that look like? And I don't know.
Well, I think that's part of the problem. I think the industry, if I want to flog the industry a little bit, which I'm a part of this industry, I feel like it's like talking about your own family to a certain degree. I think it's had a lot of time to set up regulations for itself, and it has routinely decided not to do that because it has a fear of what's going to happen if it does that. And now we're facing a much worse fear, I think, than anyone ever thought of. Nobody thought that what Mitch McConnell did, he was actually going to do. But it's a much worse situation than what would happen if the would rally around a set of regulations that it feels are reasonable, and then were to have put that forward to Congress. Now that's water under the bridge, but I still think that's what the industry needs to be doing, is subscribing to something that makes sense that they can actually get past, not an idea of just not these ideas that aren't going to work. Again, not every idea is a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had somebody on that was talking about just the state of synthetic cannabinoids, and it's not good. It's just not good. There's very little testing that's done and extremely dangerous. So whatever it is.
It's incredible how dangerous some of these products are. And when we talk about danger and we talk about hemp products, the immediate supposition is, well, some of these it's hemp that could be dangerous. Well, not necessarily. There's a lot of other stuff inside some of these vape cartridges or some of these gummies that when you're making some of these synthetics nobody's talking about. Mm-hmm. Cannabinoids are likely the least of our problem when it comes to what are people ingesting.
Yeah, it's not the cannabinoids that you're after, it's the byproduct to get the cannabinoids. And the byproducts are not tested often and consumed. Yep. And it leaves a black eye to the industry, to everybody involved. And the result really is what we have right now.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing's difficult because I'm a person of personal freedom. One of the nice things about living in the state of Nebraska, I come from a town of 400 people, and if I want to drive 100 mile an hour down the road, the likelihood that somebody's going to notice that is nil. There's a lot of personal freedom in central Nebraska, and I appreciate that. And I want people to have personal freedom. But if we're putting products into the marketplace that could have life-altering effects and for the negative, and we don't have that sorted out as to what those effects are, and then we can't tell consumers what the effect is, that's not a good thing for the industry. It would be awful if what happened to the tobacco industry happened to the hemp industry because we decided not to test products and find out what the consequences of some of these products are.
Yeah, huge. Oh, Andrew, these things are, I'm guessing it's happening fast. You're talking to representatives right now. You're pushing towards a resolution, particularly on your side of the industry. I would love to have you back whenever things get resolved or when we're closer to an idea of what it looks like.
I'd love to keep talking about that. And just really quick, one thing, I oftentimes get accused of being anti-cannabinoid, and it couldn't be further from I'm definitely pro-cannabinoid, but Well, I guess what I'd like people to understand about my position is I'm industrial hemp first, and there's only so many battles I can fight in a day. So I'm going to focus on industrial hemp, the grain, the fiber, the farmers that I'm working to make sure that we get a true rotational crop in the United States, because that's my passion, is a rotational crop. And I want to help support the cannabinoid industry any way I can. It's the cannabinoids are not my battle to fight, and I wish that industry, that side of it, would let me help them more than they are right now.
Guys, it's true. It's the same plant. We got to work together.
Yeah, we do need to work together.
Andrew, thank you so much for taking your time to come on and give us an update on the forefront of what's happening in the hemp industry from a legislative perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the next time we talk.
Thanks for listening to the KayaCast podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite podcast app or visit our website to access